everyone, and welcome to the Jessica Yellin Show. It is our second episode of the new live show, and thank you for all your support and encouragement and for being here today. As you know, this show is a place where we connect the dots on what's going on in the world in ways intended to leave you empowered and informed with knowledge, and when we can, calm, although that's increasingly challenging. If you don't already know, I'm Jessica Yellin. I'm past chief White House correspondent at CNN and the founder of News Not Noise, where our mission is to give you information, not a panic attack. We wrote that motto before the Trump years. Okay, well, I'm very excited today to be having a conversation with an incredible human being, Ben Wizner, whom I've known for many, many years, too many years to actually name, who is one of the top lawyers at the ACLU and director of the Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project at the ACLU. Ben has litigated cases on everything from the right to protest, freedom of expression online, and to government surveillance practices. He has been the lead attorney for NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden for more than a decade and a friend from college. So, Ben, it is wonderful to see you. Thank you for taking the time.
Really nice to see you too, Jessica.
I've wanted to talk to you for so long about a lot of these issues, and now they are urgent. So, I thought we could just jump right in. A court has issued a decision, a finding, an order in the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case. Just to remind my audience, this is a Maryland man who was wrongly taken by the US government to that prison in El Salvador. A judge has ordered the government to facilitate his return, bring him back, and they have stonewalled, stalled, and not complied. Now a court has issued an order, and Ben, would you just tell us a little bit about what did this order pertain to and why was it so powerful?
Well, yeah, just taking one step back here, the government, the Trump administration, has taken the remarkable position and argued to the Supreme Court that although they mistakenly sent this person to El Salvador, despite an order from an immigration judge saying that they couldn't do that he was not removable, there's now nothing they can do about it and nothing that the courts can do about it. And it was quite encouraging to see that all 9 justices of the Supreme Court, of a Supreme Court that has a conservative supermajority, flatly rejected that assertion. Now, I think they did so a little bit too politely. They said, we expect that the government will facilitate his release from El Salvador, an power of one country to order another country what to do. But it's obvious to everyone that if the United States actually wants this person back from a client state who we're paying lots of money to house people in a notorious prison, all we have to do is ask. The Trump administration's response to this has been mockery and contempt. You saw Stephen Miller, the deputy White House chief of staff, and Trump's id, essentially saying, the justices agreed with us. They said there's nothing we have to do, and we're going to leave this terrorist in El Salvador. You saw this kind of staged conversation with the Salvadoran president and the White House where they essentially joked about it, and both El Salvador and the U.S. said there's nothing we can do about it, pretended to be powerless to solve this. So this is a kind of just boorish, real bratty even behavior, and not the way that you would expect our government to respond to an order of a conservative Supreme Court made up of its own ideological allies for the most part, right? It went back to a district judge in Maryland who said, all right, let's now get to the bottom of this. The court says that you have to facilitate this. It said you needed to report to me what steps you were going to take to make this happen. And the government essentially said, we're not going to do this. Give us a week to answer your questions. It only took them 20 minutes to send the wrong person to El Salvador. And the judge said, we're not going to play around anymore. We're going to have some discovery. You're going to have officials come in to be deposed. And I'm going to really get to the bottom of who is doing what here. The government didn't like that order. And so they said, we're going to now appeal. And we're going to try to get the appellate court to stop this discovery that the lower court ordered because we shouldn't have to be subjected to this. And a panel of the Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit which is the Court of Appeals based in Virginia, rejected the government's petition today. And in a really remarkable decision by Judge Harvey Wilkinson, who's quite a conservative judge, and I can say that from experience. He has yelled at me from the bench before. And told me, "What are you doing? Making these human rights arguments." This is a guy who actually loves executive power,
Wow.
but he was deeply offended by the Trump administration's position and conduct here, and in a almost sorrowful opinion, he said, "You are both weakening the court and weakening the executive branch with this brazen disregard of our order." He said, "Every American, even far from the courtroom, should be appalled by the idea that the government could make a mistake like this and then claim powerlessness to respond to it." And hovering in the background, of course, is the notion that even if they did this to a U.S. citizen, they would be making exactly the same argument, that they couldn't bring the person back. And this is why, regardless of whether you know about or care about this particular person, this is a trial balloon like everything the Trump administration does. And he expressed a hope that there could be some kind of resolution here that respects the government's power, but also reaches the right outcome. I mean, I will tell you, this case is far from over. It's almost certainly going to go back to the Supreme Court. We have not heard the last word. And I do get the sense, look, the Trump administration is playing with fire here. They're really pushing us close to one of these break glass moments, quite recklessly, I think, and really needlessly. But I also think they're underestimating the kind of strength and wisdom of the country. And I don't think it's just going to be liberal lawyers like me who are appalled by this, or even conservative lawyers like Judge Wilkinson. I saw a speech online yesterday from a blue-collar union leader representing the union that Abrego Garcia is part of, and in a room full of union workers saying, "Bring our brother home." And they stood up and cheered. I'm sure many people who are watching you saw the town hall footage from Chuck Grassley's town hall, where people are really angry about this because they are capable of empathy and capable of abstract thinking and understand that what's at stake here is not the fate of this one man.
We know that this will either go next to the Supreme. I don't know. Can they appeal this to the Supreme Court right away? They could, or it goes
They
back
can
to the
try.
lower court. It's going to
They
work its
can
way through. Boasberg, there's another. Judge Boasberg is also doing an inquiry to see who was responsible, so they can refer them for criminal contempt. All of that is like legal process. Can I ask you a bigger picture question, which
Yeah.
is, let's say that ultimately Supreme Court clarifies its ruling and says, you got to bring him back. Whatever words you want to use, bring him back. And they defy that. What power does the court have to enforce its will?
The court doesn't have its own army. And in our system, although we've recognized judicial supremacy, meaning judicial last word on constitutional questions now for 2 centuries, the reason why that has worked is because presidents of both parties, even those who didn't like the Supreme Court's rulings, never really questioned whether they would follow them or not. They understood that they needed to follow them. There were moments of tension between the court and the presidency before. This isn't the first one, but in a way, it's the most remarkable one. Now, there are some tools. You mentioned criminal contempt. Judge Boasberg, if it comes to this, could appoint his own prosecutor, someone outside of the Department of Justice, to bring criminal contempt charges against Trump administration officials who don't comply here. That's a pretty extreme outcome. I think he will probably try to avoid doing that, and he will give them every chance to avoid having that happen. But that's not toothless. I mean, we saw Peter Navarro go to jail for 4 months for criminal contempt. You can be held in criminal contempt of Congress or of a court for not playing by the rules. Now, if we really want to spin this out,
Would that be like Pam Bondi or a lower level
well,
attorney at DOJ?
this is what Judge Boasberg is trying to find out. He essentially said to the government in that case, and this is a different case involving the Alien Enemies Act. This case is an ACLU case. He said, I'm going to give you 2 options broadly. The first is you can cure the jurisdictional problem. That's legal language for get those people back, right? The people who you put on a plane deliberately to avoid judicial review, bring them back within the jurisdiction of this court. If you do that, we don't have any problems with contempt. Your second option is to give me information about specifically who violated my court order so that I can investigate sanctions and possible contempt. Is it Bondi? We don't know. The government has made the implausible argument that it's a state secret who said what, even though Marco Rubio was tweeting about it in real time, right? But and Judge Boasberg, who is not a stranger to secrecy arguments, he was the head of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, is not impressed
Right.
by those
Yes.
arguments. So look, it could come to that. I mean, again, if we want to spin out nightmare scenarios, and I'm trying to be calming and not frightening here, what would happen if Trump pardoned those people? Which would, in a way, be a self-pardon because the chain of responsibility goes up to him. And then you essentially have the president using his constitutional authority to take away the judicial branch's constitutional authority because he's saying you can't even use contempt. Look, I don't think we're going to get to that point. I think there's too many Republicans in Washington, and you know them, who don't want to see this Supreme Court weakened. And they don't want to see it weakened because many of them traded their own integrity to install a conservative supermajority that's going to be there for the next 30 years. Trump is not going to be there for the next 30 years, whatever he may think or hint at. He's going to be gone. And so at precisely the moment of Federalist Society and conservative triumph over the judiciary, now they're going to trash it and weaken it so that the next
Right.
Democratic president can ignore it. I think there's a lot of incentive among other institutional players to make sure that we don't reach that moment of full constitutional crisis.
Smart. It's why Leonard Leo, the head of the Federalist Society, is working so hard to defend and protect the courts right now.
Right?
Ish, yeah. So, is there a role for Congress to play, just to button this up? If the administration defies the Supreme Court, is there a role for Congress in that?
So far, Congress's role seems to have been to hand all of its power to an unchecked executive branch. I mean, the one thing that you would think that Congress would be protective of, which is the power of the purse, which is how Congress stays in the game, it has just completely handed over to Elon Musk, not elected by anybody. So I'm not holding out hope that the Congress between now and 2026 is going to play an effective role. Now, it can still play an oversight role. It can still call people to testify. It can still try to. I mean, I think it's useful to see members of Congress going down to El Salvador, not just to take gross selfies, but actually to try to get in.
Right.
And look, maybe that's the way that we avoid this crisis, is that at some point everyone agrees that letting him return with a congressional delegation is some kind of face-saving measure that avoids this problem. But yes, and I think by the same measure, we're going to see members of Congress going down to those immigration jails in Louisiana to see the green card holders who are being locked up and threatened with deportation just because of their political speech. So there's a lot of things that members of Congress can do right now to lend support, to kind of lock hands in solidarity with the victims of these abuses. And I think they can also educate their constituents, although we're seeing more constituents educating members of Congress.
Correct.
That
But they're all in this space of sort
yeah,
of politics and messaging as opposed to binding power of law.
I think
Well,
so. I mean, look, this has been deja vu for me. I started my ACLU career a month before 9/11. I was in Guantanamo many times. I was involved in secret prisons and that kind of war on terror work. And really, what we're seeing with this prison in El Salvador is a supercharged version of Guantanamo. Remember, the reason why the Bush administration set up the prison in Guantanamo was literally to create an island outside the law,
right.
a place where people could be detained and interrogated without rules or restraints and without lawyers coming in. Now, they lost on that in the Supreme Court a few times, and lawyers were able to come in, like me and others, and bring some semblance of due process to what was going on there. But one thing that you see when you create an island outside the law is that most of the people brought there are brought there erroneously. Now, that was true at Guantanamo, where the vast majority of the 800 men and boys who were brought there were not hardened terrorists, but people who were, picked up for bounties in Afghanistan. Some were as young as 13 and some were as old as 95. And it's true in El Salvador. And the Times did a monumental piece this week where they looked at every single person who is allegedly a member of this Venezuelan gang. the almost 300 people and found that only 30 of them had ever been involved in serious crimes, a handful more in not serious crimes, and the vast majority of them no connection to criminal activity in any country whatsoever. So that's what happens. Now, this one's even more extreme because in Guantanamo, it was a U.S. naval base, and the court was able to assert U.S. jurisdiction over it. Here, no court can actually assert U.S. jurisdiction over this prison, this torture gang prison. All we can do is assert jurisdiction over U.S. actors and tell them what they need to do, what they need to try. But if this theory, survives, if the Trump administration thumbs its nose fully at the courts here, there is literally nothing to prevent them from sending a U.S. citizen down there and then throwing up their hands and saying we can't do anything about it.
Jesus. Okay, this is what I want to ask you about next. So there's a case breaking right now, a story breaking right now, and I just want to nuance this for the audience and say, we have limited information and more details could come in and cast our understanding of this. But as best we understand, there's a man named Juan Carlos Lopez Gomez, who's a U.S. citizen born in Georgia, 20 years old, who's currently in jail in Leon County, Florida, awaiting pickup by ICE for presumably, he's detained by ICE, presumably for deportation. He's accused of violating a Florida law that bars undocumented individuals from entering Florida. I know the ACLU has sued over that law, and I think there's a TRO against it. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, this human being is, as we speak, behind bars in Florida awaiting ICE pickup. And the judge in the case said she's a judge. She doesn't have power to release him. I mean, Ben, what can happen here?
Well, I mean, let's hope this is an administrative error that's going to be fixed pretty quickly. There's a lot of eyes on this right now. I think it's gotten a lot of attention in the media and social media. I think what this state judge is saying is that he's being held on an ICE detainer, and so only ICE, only the federal government can fix the problem. And I don't actually happen to know if that's true or not, but that's her understanding of her own authority. This isn't the first time that there have been these kinds of mistakes. I mean, ICE is a massive operation, especially when they're trying to remove 1 million people in a year. They may make these kinds of mistakes, and let's hope that's what it is, and that tomorrow you can give an update to people saying that he's been released. For now, that's what I'm going to say. Going back to what I said a minute ago, again, nothing. If they did decide to put him on a plane to El Salvador right now, it would be the equivalent legal situation to what they've done in these other cases in terms of the argument that they would make. My guess is that if they're actually planning to do that deliberately, they won't set it up where there's days of delay in a Florida jail.
Right.
They'll
Right.
decide who they're going to do it to, and they'll do it. And so, again, my read, just based on having seen this on social media, is that this is most likely an error that will be fixed. Because if it were part of a nefarious plot, they would use their playbook, which is to have the person out of the country before anybody knows about it.
Right, that's true. Is there any precedent for the US sort of indefinitely detaining a citizen without charges? I guess
Yeah.
internment?
Well, so of course there is the Japanese internment, but more recently in the War on Terror, um, and this is a case that I was involved with, where Judge Wilkinson, who I mentioned before, yelled at me. But we represented Jose Padilla. Jose Padilla was a U.S.
Right.
citizen who was arrested at O'Hare Airport. The Bush administration said he was an enemy combatant. They transferred him to a military brig in South Carolina, where he was subjected to what I call torture, sensory deprivation, beatings, held for years there, and great damage to his physical and mental health. And then, after the Supreme Court kind of balked at that exercise of authority, he was transferred to the civilian system eventually. But yes, I mean, there is evidence. I mean, there is precedent for declaring someone an enemy combatant and then holding them without
But
charging.
these guys aren't declared I guess gang members, terrorists, it's what he calls them. Yeah.
This is the
It's
move that they're trying to do. They're
right.
trying to create states of exception.
Right.
The biggest barrier to the mass deportation plan is due process. There are many millions of people who ultimately will not be able to mount successful defenses to deportation in this country. But our system does give them an opportunity to go before an immigration judge and say that they may be eligible for some forms of relief. Maybe they're eligible to make an asylum claim. Maybe they're eligible to adjust their status because of family members. If they have to bring every one of these people before a judge, then that slows down tremendously the number of people that they can deport in a given year. And so they're coming up with these far-fetched theories. For example, that we are at war with a Venezuelan gang that none of us had ever heard of until a few weeks ago, right? And if we're at war with them, then they are enemy soldiers and we don't have to give them this kind of process. Well, you know what? That argument was too much even for the Supreme Court. And again, all 9 justices of the Supreme Court said, that not only can people get judicial review of whether they're a member of that gang, but they can get judicial review of whether the Enemies Act was even properly invoked in that case, right? But that's really the game plan is, try to create these legal categories that allow them to be more efficient in their deportation. The rumor is that Stephen Miller has this fetish about getting to 1 million people deported this year, because the highest number in the past was something like 400,000 during the second Obama term. And these are the tools they're using to try to get there.
I want to ask you about a few other topics, so I'm going to do a hard turn. You'd mentioned the foreign visa holders, students who are in a Louisiana detention center and elsewhere. I have a specific question about this, and I'd like you to address it broadly. If you think that maybe they're being held on viewpoint, it's a case of viewpoint discrimination or what this is. But I also have another question, which I get a lot from the audience. And are there legal ways to revoke someone's visa? And if, for example, somebody is a student here and does do engage in threatening or harassing behavior on campus, breaks rules, is there a different governing law for that versus somebody who writes an op-ed, shows up at a protest? Are those treated as different things?
Yeah, so here I should just say I am a constitutional lawyer, not an immigration
Right.
lawyer, and those things are colliding, but they don't totally overlap now. But I will say that people who are here on visas certainly have fewer rights than people who are lawful permanent residents, people like Mahmoud Khalil who have green cards, who have undergone background checks, who have been told by our government that they can stay forever, and in fact that they're eligible to apply for naturalization. That's the same for this young man in Vermont this week who went for his citizenship interview because he had a green card and was instead arrested by ICE for his speech. So the government does have fairly broad discretion to revoke a student visa. What we would say is they can't do that in violation of the First Amendment. The First Amendment is a constraint on government. It's not just about what rights a person has, it's about what limitations the government has. And so even if the government can revoke visas for everyone, it can't revoke them only for someone who wrote an op-ed that is critical of the university's policy towards the Israel-Gaza conflict, as happened in the case of Rumeysa Ozturk, who's now being detained in Louisiana. So that will be adjudicated. But we're actually seeing them, and this frankly took me by surprise, that they would try to petition to have the green cards removed for people for nothing more than their political speech. In the Khalil case, they've submitted no evidence of anything that he did other than express support for Palestinian human rights. They haven't submitted any evidence that he disrupted anyone on campus, that he harassed anyone on campus, even that he engaged in anti-Semitic speech. And I keep waiting for them to produce a video showing him saying something that would offend me. I would still represent him. And they have come up with nothing in these cases. And so we really are in this kind of neo-McCarthyite world where people are being snatched off the street and locked away and flown to remote jails and prisons simply for their dissident speech. And that is extraordinary. And, the idea that we're focusing on, well, maybe they don't have a right to be here. Maybe it's just a privilege to be here. The question is, should the government have the power to single out everyone who expresses a viewpoint that the government is offended by and lock that person away? There's 12 million people in this country who have green cards. Do Republicans really want to establish the precedent that any Secretary of State can say this person's speech is awkward for my foreign policy, so I'm going to lock this person up and send him back to whatever country that he comes from? especially with an electorate that is less and less polarized, in terms of racially and immigration status. Maybe they think all 12 million of those people are future Democrats. I don't think that's the case. Actually, I don't think the numbers really bear that out.
Wow. It's chilling the way you frame it. I mean, it was chilling before, but okay, I have to catch my breath.
Let's take a step back. Let's be a little
Yes.
less for a second, because
Okay.
everyone always wants to know: are we in a crisis? Are we in a constitutional crisis?
Yes.
And so let's just surface that.
Okay.
And to me, it's really not exactly the right question. I think it's fair to say that Trump is doing everything possible to create a crisis. And he's putting more pressure on our institutions in a shorter period of time than any of us expected. And that includes the courts, but it includes the legal profession, it includes the media, it includes universities, and we're seeing these manifestly illegal actions against all of them. I mean, the orders against Columbia and Harvard are completely illegal. Luckily, our alma mater, Harvard, is going to stand up and challenge that, and that's nice to see. The orders against the law firms are completely illegal. 4 federal judges appointed by different presidents all said immediately these are completely illegal, and yet we see the other law firms capitulating, surrendering power handing the president power he doesn't have. To me, the real question is, can these institutions withstand this kind of barrage? And my answer right now is yes. I think we can. So far, the courts have done quite a commendable job. I mean, literally dozens of cases, slowing down, enjoining, blocking some of these policies. We've seen recently the Supreme Court twice in unanimous decisions rejecting the most extreme positions of the Trump administration. Now, time will tell whether they have the guts to enforce those, and we are not out of the woods here. But I want to give a message of encouragement, because it really makes a difference whether people think, well, it's hopeless, we're already in a crisis, let's look at real estate in Canada. Whether they say, like, actually solidarity works, the institutions are stronger than Trump thinks they are, the country is bigger and stranger than Trump thinks it is. There's different pockets of power around our country. I mean, California is a power in and of itself. Like, this is a hard country to govern. And we have a very inefficient democracy. It's very hard to turn it off quickly. There's a lot of levers that we still have. We haven't even tried mass protests in the streets. There's really still a lot that we can do and that we will do. And I hope people get the sense, like, let's get to 2026. That's the next time the voters get to speak en masse. What's my job? My job is to try to slow them down as much as possible, to give the rest of you time to heal, to give the rest of you time to organize, because only politics can solve problems that politics creates. Law can't solve them. It can, again, as I said, throw sand in the gears, but the people actually have to resolve this. No elite institution, including law, is going to resolve it for them. So, get ready. Fight.
Wow.
Do your piece. Everyone has a different piece. Everyone has a different piece.
That was so powerful. And I just want to share, Ben and I spoke, I think, about 3 months ago, and you had a much gloomier message at that time. So I feel very good to hear this right now. Thank you.
My colleagues have been working nights and weekends, and they've filed 30 lawsuits against Trump actions in the first 85 days. And are ready for the next 30. So, in a way, it's easier to be in a place that is actually doing the work and not just doom scrolling. And maybe
Yes.
that's why I feel more energized than people who have to just kind of watch the news and see everything crumbling. But, I see us fighting and I see us winning.
Uh, I could let you go there, but can I just keep you for 2 more questions?
Yeah.
Okay. One is a little selfish because I do so much on social media, but my audience spends a lot of time on social media, and we all keep hearing that there are data firms and consultants working with the government to scan people's social media for derogatory comments. Now, we're not at a point where they're stopping citizens for that, but everyone's worried about Trump potentially doing this, scanning our social media and targeting people who are critics. What are our rights? What is possible? Like, you actually know, are these companies, do you think they give them access? And how
I
do we
think
keep
they're
ourselves safe?
mostly. I think mostly the entities that are supposedly using AI and tech to scan social media, they're mostly snake oil salesmen. um, figuring out who the opponents of the government are is a pretty low tech problem. And so the people who are already experiencing this are people who are non-citizens who have expressed support for Palestinian human rights. Um, and they're the ones who will be, the first people targeted with these kinds of tools. But in the meantime, there's a bunch of groups that are essentially just feeding names to the Trump administration, and those are the people who are being arrested and targeted.
I
They're
see.
right. So, and look, I think we will bring a legal challenge against this idea that if you have expressed a political view on social media or elsewhere, you can be denied an immigration benefit, like the ability to get a green card or the ability to become a citizen, because we don't want um, any president to get to have ideological control over who becomes a resident of this country, viewpoint-based control. I get for citizens, they have a lot fewer levers for harassing us. And so, I mean, one thing that I think citizens can worry about if they are, very active against the Trump administration, this is the thing that my colleagues worry about is, well, do we want to be traveling back to the United States from abroad with privileged attorney-client information on our phones about our cases against the Trump administration? And can we figure out a workaround so we don't have to do that? Because, at the border, our rights are reduced. They can search us without a warrant or probable cause. They can seize devices. In some cases, they can scan them. And, for us, we're not worried about getting arrested, but we're worried about compromising sensitive information about our clients. But we're not yet at the point where citizens need to be self-censoring because of this. And if anything,
Okay.
I'd love to give the opposite message here. Again, that is handing Trump power he doesn't have. If you stay quiet because you're worried about what will happen to you, it's the people who have the strongest legal rights in this society who have to stand up for the people who have the weakest legal rights in this society. And if you have a U.S. passport, you're one of the stronger.
Mhm. And I guess last question, you'd said you're doing the work of slowing this down so people can heal and get in the streets and make their voices heard.
And vote.
Um, and vote, yes. And I've heard from others that, America waits too long to get in the streets and we're in danger of it being too late. Are you of the view that there should be mass marches now, and where are they? Would you call on people to get out now, or this isn't your
You know,
role,
I,
so you can't say?
look, I think we'll feel when the time is right for
Mm,
everyone to. We're starting to see. I mean, I think people who are going to town halls, that's terrific. There are small events that are about particular issues, about immigrants' rights or about Doge, and people are getting out. People are relearning the muscle. I do think the reason why we didn't see a women's march at inauguration with 4 million people is that people were in a bit of shock.
mhm.
They were adjusting to a world in which Trump actually won the popular vote. This isn't anything that people expected. It was easier to think of him as illegitimate, as a Russian plant, as the product of misinformation, as someone who cheated and snuck in through the Electoral College. And there was this moment of thinking, wow, how did all of these fellow citizens who watched what I watched on January 6th and before and after decide to return him to office just a few years later? But of course, that kind of reckoning that I still think is necessary. We still do need to understand why millions of people who voted for Barack Obama voted for Donald Trump. And that's a subject for another day. But that's kind of been washed away by just how absolutely brutal, extreme, cruel the Trump administration has been, by the just sheer vandalism that they are unleashing on us and on our government over the last 80 days. But I do think that we'll know. So, for example, a break last moment. I mean, if they really do reject every polite Supreme Court invitation to follow the law, we'll know. That it's time for different kinds of mobilization, and it's time for us to do what we've seen in other countries, in Serbia recently, in Tel Aviv last year, where your government itself feels like a coup, and the people need to claim it back by taking to the streets.
Okay, now my truly last question. Is Signal still safe to use?
I mean, you need to understand what these things do or don't do. The reason why Signal is safer than, say, your ordinary text messages or emails is that even if the government had a warrant, if the government has a warrant and goes to Google, Google will have to turn over your emails in an unencrypted form. If the government has a warrant and goes to Signal, Signal will say, sorry, we don't even have it. That's what
Right.
end-to-end encrypted means. Um, on the other hand, if someone grabs your phone and is able to get into it because you don't have a sufficient password or they put your fingerprint or face print on it, then they'll be able to see everything that you can see as well. So I don't want people to have the illusion of safety. What I can tell you is that I and my colleagues use Signal because we
So,
don't know a safer and more secure way to communicate. So I think that's the strongest endorsement I can give.
well, from you, that's a very strong endorsement. Ben, you just have a wealth of knowledge and you communicate it so clearly and powerfully and with such empathy. I'm grateful for your time here and just for your work all the time. Thank you for what you
Let's do
do.
it. Let's do it again sometime.
I would love it. And people can give to the ACLU.
They can, and to other organizations that are doing heroic work.
Yes. Okay. Have a fabulous rest of your day. Thank you. I look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks a lot, Jess.
Bye. See you soon. Well, that was just such a powerful conversation, and I am lucky to be able to be in conversation with people who make the issues so clear. I think I want to underscore two things that Ben said. One is that he is seeing the courts hold, that they are doing this work and slowing down the administration's efforts to bust through the legal, to sort of break our legal system if they can. We've seen them effectively stand up to the presidency, to the president on a number of issues, regardless of whether the judges were appointed by a Republican or a Democrat. So that is important to remember and hold on to. And the decision that was issued today that Ben talked about, I'll post on it. It is worth reading. It's very short. It's very powerful. And he explained to me it came from such a traditional conservative judge. It's going to reassure you that across the political spectrum, there are so many people who believe in the fundamental values of what our Constitution stands for, what it says we must do, and the importance of upholding the rule of law. That's one. Number two, he did make it clear that public attention matters, right? He said he thinks that this US citizen is likely to be freed because it's getting so much attention. And that the men who were taken to El Salvador are in the situation they're in because it was done in the dark of night without the attention. So your engagement does make a difference. Sharing it on social media, posting. I learned about that through social media, right? First. So sharing, posting, telling people matters. Number three, uh, right, he said it takes time to get to 2026, but we all have to heal and make our sort of participate and do what we can to find the right posture for ourselves, the issues, the topics that we care about, and the way that we can get involved. But he also did say sometimes doing that just is this old fashioned thing, which means picking up your phone and calling your member of Congress. There's a new campaign to mail envelopes, letters to the White House because the White House is not taking calls and they're not receiving emails and they're not responding to the public. So there's a new campaign to send them snail mail, which what do? You get a letter, you can't block it, right? So there's a lot going on and a lot of people working right now. I have had the pleasure of talking to some fantastic attorneys this week, Jessica Roth earlier this week, and Ben today, both of whom were college friends. So sometimes college really does pay off. Uh, I'd love to know what you'd like me to talk about, who you'd like me to interview, other topics you'd like me to cover going forward. So please, you can either, if you're a paid subscriber, you can do that by commenting on any newsletter, or anybody can email us at community@newsnotnoise.com. And remember, all of this is meant to be information that empowers you. If you take it in with clarity, breathe through it, then you have the knowledge you can use to take action. The minute you get into panic and fight or flight, you're no longer useful to help defend the issues you care so much about. So, self care, inhale, hold, slow exhale. See, it already calms me down. Thank you for being here. Send me your questions and I'll see you soon. And I'll send this out in an email if you want to watch, if you missed the top, you can watch it again. Okay.